Morning, y'all. Today we're going to continue to talk about historiography or history, and we're going to focus on historiography instead of just on the origins of history like we did in the last video yesterday. I see only a couple of you guys have turned in the actual assignment. So be sure that you do that. Stuff's pretty simple. I'm trying to keep it pretty easy. I mean, this isn't the most ideal format, obviously. I wish we could do this in class so I could have you guys doing different exercises and different ways of approaching this stuff instead of just video. But sadly, we don't have that option. So make sure that you're watching the videos and getting stuff done as it's due so that it doesn't pile up. It'll be easy, easier if you don't let it pile up. Try to keep it so that it's not any more than half an hour of video for you guys or anything like that. We'll keep it as quick as possible while still getting information to y'all. And I'm gonna continue to do the questions afterwards. Just try to answer them in full sentences. Part of history and being a historian is writing. I mean, that's the biggest part of it, is reading and writing efficiently. You're almost more of a writer than anything else. And so in my history class, you will be writing a lot because that's the way history is. It's not fill in the blank answers. Usually it's not multiple choice. If you want to get the gist of what's going on and know to form an argument and to form an opinion and to analyze information, you have to do more with that information than just fill in a blank. You have to actually construct that knowledge, and writing is the way that you do that. It's the way you build your own knowledge instead of just, you taking the knowledge that I give you and utilizing it. You build your own this way. So we are just going to go over some of the slides in my slideshow because there's a lot to cover. So historiography. The past does not influence me, I influence it. The past is a foreign country. They do things differently there. I like the second quote, the past is a foreign country. They do things differently there. As we study history, we'll be talking a lot of slavery and destruction and wholesale murder of cities, and even as we analyze the way people live, the way the religious beliefs, the food they ate, why they traveled the world, what they thought was valuable, all these things are different than the way we do them now. So when we're viewing the past, we're viewing it through a modern lens. You're taking your modern value system and then imprinting that value system onto the people that we study. And it's important to be aware that you're doing that so that you don't cloud your judgment of events, places, phenomena, people, or things because you're trying to view them in a modern lens when the way that they happened, the world was different and people were different and things they believed were different. That's pretty much the past does not influence me, I influence it. It's the same idea. When someone tells you a story of, say, World War II, they're telling it through the lens of their belief system. And they're going to always imprint the way they feel on that story. And that's why history, even though we try to use it as scientifically as possible, is still a social science. It's still about humans and how humans act, no matter how much we want it to be about facts. Knowledge is of two kinds. We know we can subject ourselves, or we know where we can find information upon it. That's kind of a little wordy and up there, so not my favorite quote. Okay, so history, as we covered this yesterday, but it's important to review things. Going back over information is a really good way to imprint it in your mind. It's one of the best ways to learn things, is repetition. So history is an account of everything that has happened in the past, everything in the whole world that humans have ever done, and before that even, too, this pre-human history. Every single thought, excuse me, every thought, every action, every event is tough to know, obviously. We can't know everything. Do we know the inner thoughts of a soldier as they run through no man's land in World War I? Well, no. There's obviously no way. You can know. The only way is a diary, obviously, but you wouldn't. Even then, you're just knowing what he's writing after he ran through no man's land in World War I, not as he runs through it. A diary excerpt written afterwards may help us know a bit of what went through the soldier's mind. That's a bit is an important part of that sentence. You never know exactly what happened. History is an account of the past. It's not the story of the past. It's our best way of recalling the past. And it's not specifically knowing what happened in the past, rather the act of selecting, analyzing, and then writing about the past. Kind of cool, an important distinction. It's all about writing and analyzing. It's not about knowing what happened. Historiography. The Greek word from history, the same word we use, and graphy, writing. That's why graffiti. The word graffiti is based in graphy, writing. So the writing of history, especially the writing of history based on critical examination of sources. This is the definition of historiography in the dictionary. So sorry, I'll start over. The writing of history, especially the writing of history based on the critical examination of sources, the selection of particulars from the authentic material, and the synthesis of particulars into a narrative that will stand the test of critical methods. Really wordy. It's the principal theory and history of historical writing. We got a little bit more simply, a better way to put it than the dictionary, because the dictionary can get really intense with the way it defines things. The history of how history has been written over the ages. So it's basically the history of how people write history. That's what historiography is. The history of the philosophies which have governed how historians have written history over the ages. It's the history of the way people have written history, basically. That's just another way of wording that. Epistemology is a branch of philosophy. It's kind of like history. Historiography as history, it's the study, just like I said, the study of history writing. So the main characters would be historians, like those guys I talked about last time, Herodotus, Ibn Khaldun, Sim Chien, those individuals. If you were going to write a historiography book, you would write about the way that they wrote about history. And every good book about a subject will start with a historiography about that subject. A good World War II research book will always have a chapter devoted to the historiography, and then they will talk about the sources they utilized and how those sources were written, why they were written, and why they're using those sources. Some of these guys we talked about, two of the guys on this we talked about yesterday, Herodotus. They set the path for the beginning of history, essentially at the beginning of writing of history. Thucydides, he came after Herodotus. He criticized Herodotus, actually, because Herodotus had folklore, fables, the gods and stuff I talked about yesterday. And then we got Suetonius, 12 Caesars. He was a Roman. He looked at he did interviews and stuff like that when he did his writing, and Thucydides never did that. He just he never interviewed anyone and used those sources. So Suetonius kind of added a little bit on to the way that history was written. Each one of these guys kind of changed it successively. Let's see, what are we at here? Let's check the time of this meeting. 10 minutes. Okay, we still got more time. We'll go through 10 slides and then we'll call it a day. We're at 6 right now. So, oops. So, what moves history? What causes changes within history? Well, to look at that, we can look at Herodotus, the concepts of God and fate during his time. There wasn't a concept of atheism back then. You know, everyone believed, I shouldn't say everyone, but most everyone believed that gods were real. The gods controlled the sun, the moon, the water, the rain, the food, everything was controlled by gods. And so Herodotus wrote that way in his books. He wrote his histories with the gods ever present in them because that was the way he viewed the world. As that idea system fell out of favor and people only had one God, like Christianity or Islam, for example, then writing about history the way that Herodotus did wouldn't make any sense. So they don't write history that way anymore because that's what causes changes in history, is the changing in humanity and the human environment. What makes historical change happen? Well, just like I said, that. What is appropriate as a topic of research? If you were going to do historiographical research, tough word. Who makes history? Like Herodotus, for example, whose history matters. So, that's why they say history is written by the victors. That's kind of where that phrase comes from. Whose account are we reading? If you're reading a book about World War II that's written by an American soldier, it's going to be quite different than a book about World War II written by a German soldier. Any event or anything in history like that is going to have very different stories about it depending on who's writing about them. So that's why it's important not to just believe anything you read about a historical text. You have to do research on it and analyze it and come up with ideas. You have to test it like science. So if you are assigned your own paper to write, which you will be, how do you know what to focus on? Sorry about this phone in the background. You got to ask yourself, like, do I know what to look at? Do I know what to read? And then you got to ask yourself, who wrote it? Why did they write it? And then that'll be basically what your paper's on. Persia acronym for history's themes. I like acronyms. I think everyone in America does, kind of. So I made one. Politics, economics, religion, society, intellectual movements, which would be ideas, and then area, whatever you're writing about, what kind of area did it cover? What kind of politics made it up? Did they have kings, queens? Were they democracy? What kind of economic system did they use? Were they capitalist? Were they not? Religion, were they polytheistic, having many gods, or monotheistic, meaning having one god? How was their society built? Did they live in tribes? Did they live in cities? The intellectual movements would be what kind of ideas permeated in the times, and then the area, where did they live? How big was the empire? Things like that. Those are the things that we kind of study when we're studying a person or a place or a thing, or a society, basically in history. And then we try to patch it together and find examples of how those themes work together, and then focus on those areas. Another one besides Persia, you don't like Persia, you got Greeks. Geography, which is kind of the same thing as area in the last one. Religion, which we had. Achievements, which is kind of like ideas. Politics, economics, and society. So geography and achievements are the only ones that I changed in this one. But those are the themes. So right here, we've got Persia. If we're going to study the Reformation, well, the politics of it were kings and popes were wrestling for power in Europe. The Pope wanted to be able to tell the kings what to do. Kings didn't want to listen to him. The economics, Northern Europe, especially Germany, was growing and no longer wanted their money going to Rome. They weren't dependent on Rome anymore, and paying money to Rome was bothering them, so they didn't want to do it anymore. That's the economics behind the Reformation. The religion, well, the Pope is Catholic, and many Germans were Protestant, so that was also a big problem. A big theme of the Reformation was the religion. Another big theme of the Reformation was society. There was feudal systems, which we'll study later. Basically, feudal systems just means there was a king, and then the king had lords, and the lords had peasants. And then the new ideals were there were no peasants. Peasants were free from the lords, and everyone lived equally. Intellectual movements, humanism, which was that human beings were important. They, like, you are central to, like, your life instead of God being central to your life and God being the most important thing. The idea was that humans were the most important thing. That's what humanism is. Then the printing press was something that it was the first thing to ever print paper. You could print writing on paper. You could print books instead of write them by hand. So those were some huge ideals in intellectual movements in the Reformation that are huge themes of it, because they directly affected the Reformation. So agriculture, 80 to 90% were still farming, mainly in manor settings. But I had agriculture in there. I guess that's kind of like area. How they were using the area around them, agriculture, growing in the land and stuff. So most of it was farmland. Categories can help guide you. So whenever I'm looking at any one bit, like if it were World War II instead of the Reformation, we could do the politics of World War II, the economics of World War II, the religion of World War II, society of World War II, intellectual movements of World War II, and agriculture or area of World War II, cities and things like that. So it's a good way to break down topics and to know what we're even going to be looking at. It'll be these concepts. Grapes in Persia, they're very important concepts. Remember them. Okay. It's good enough. We'll end on the categories. So when we start studying historical events, which will probably be maybe later this week, at the end of this week, or possibly next week, that's when we will do these kind of acronyms. I'll have you guys break those down in some sheets or some worksheets. Anyways, that's probably all I got for you today. So take it easy and make sure you keep up on the work so it doesn't build up. Have a great day.